Good evening, everybody. Um, in 2022, I had the opportunity to gather enough aeroplan points and coins and money, etc., to go on a trip to Australia with my wife. And this is the trip we did. It was 40 days, and we rented three vehicles in three different spots. Um, uh, it's a place which I was told I should have been going to much earlier in my birding career, but as it happened, I was too busy working. And eventually we got there, and it was also the time that I had reached 1,000 or 999 days of continuous birding. So when I arrived in Sydney in October, it was my 1,000th day of continuous birding on eBird. So that was kind of fun. Um, we flew into Sydney, and lo and behold, it was raining. And here's a map of the red shows the wet precipitation covering everywhere except New Zealand. And we had to rearrange a lot of our trip due to the weather conditions. Flooding, um, flooding was in many places, and we almost lost our vehicle in one situation in one place. Um, just for those, there are 760 species, and only 300 of those are found only in Australia. In the bottom right-hand side, you see the Blue Mountains, Sydney, Hunter Valley for its wine. We went into the Blue Mountains, the area where it's the green color, Blue Mountains, New South Wales. And we spent 3 or 4 days there. And we went as far as Griffin and Orange. And this whole area was under flood watch. And we had planned a whole trip to go one way. Unfortunately, we had to rearrange our trip completely because of the weather. So we landed up going to the Natural History Museum in Sydney, which is a must because they have a collection of birds of every bird of Australia there. Um, so that was kind of something to do on a rainy day before we actually took off on our trip. And um, I took a few pictures around the museum of what creatures would have existed throughout the period in Australia, including this one here. So what I've done is because I have a memory like a sieve, I have actually put the names of each and every bird uh, onto this presentation. Now, you might wonder what this is. This is a water fountain, and it's water coming down from the top from a spray onto this bin turkey, and the water is flowing down below. Purely an iPhone shot, but it was just the first bird I saw when I was uh, in Australia. And of course, the white ibis is a sacred bird for the Aboriginal indigenous people. I was hoping to see lots of gulls when I was in Australia, but there aren't too many. There's the silver gull, just a couple others in the area I was going to visit. But lapwings, of course, everywhere you go in the world, there are lapwings. I think there's about 45 species of lapwing. Um, and the one we saw was the mast. Every bird almost I set eyes upon was a lifer. I ended up with 249 species of birds during our trip. Um, the one which we saw many, many of, and those who have been there, which are probably lots of you, and those who haven't been there, hopefully you can live vicariously through this presentation. But the sulfur-crested cockatoo is a bird which in captivity can live up to 100 years of age and can be taught all kinds of tricks and talking in the wild. Probably a lifespan of about 40 years is would be normal. I went down to the botanical gardens for the second day we were there just to shake off the jet lag. We went over on the end of COVID, so we had to wear masks on the plane. And everywhere we went to, many of the places we had planned to visit were flooded. because of the amount of rain. This is at the Olympic Park, which is another good spot, purely because there's lots of shrubbery and water, and allows the bird going to a country for the first time to start picking up some of this easier species, which you might not see elsewhere. Now, I did go on the second day I was there with a bird in Powell, and he helped me find some of these birds. The whip of the whip bird is the coo in the whip. One is the male, and the other is the female. So the first leg, um, from Sydney to the Central Tablelands, we did one, as it says, 1,700. We were very careful. We did not drive any time after in evening time because of the possibility of colliding with the kangaroos. So this is the breakdown of the area we traveled in. We rented a vehicle. It was about 200 bucks a day, and then we had a bit of food on top. We were doing 250. I also wanted to visit the birthplace of the greatest cricketer ever, for those who are into cricket, Donald Bradman. So, being a cricket fan myself, we had to do a little detour, but there we go. For those who don't like cricket, it doesn't mean a thing, but for those who are into cricket, there you go. It's like the Wayne Gretzky of cricket. And this is Lynn, and she was kind enough to accompany us on for 3 days on this trip, which we did uh, to into the interior of New South Wales, where we came across a lot of flooding, a lot of muddy roads, and of course we didn't buy this, but I thought I would make an interesting. So the countryside, this is the countryside of Ned Kelly, um, beautiful rolling hills, free camping everywhere, black kites flying all around. It was like being in heaven, actually. It was just a wonderful experience. And here, this lucky guy, look what he found. 630 pounds of gold. That's pretty neat. Ned Kelly wandered these streets, wandered these hills, robbed and murdered. This is the Australian breast turkey, which pecked my wife's toe and drew blood. Um, Kind of interesting bird. We don't have anything like that, I don't think, over here. Pretty interesting. So this was basically a birding tour, not so much a photography tour. So one of the areas, a lot of the three areas we're going to see was Lake Cargello and Namimbi and Round Hill. Um, Three different types of habitats. Um, the lakes were overflowing. Namimbi was rushing water, and Round Hill was damp. But the advantage of it all was that there was a lot of wildflowers, um, a lot of wildflowers flowering. And here are some of the birds we found around the lakes. All these pictures are kind of heavily cropped. This is a lot of the roads we were on. We had to go through water. Um, it was just an incredible amount of water. At one point, we were had to cross, I think, a dozen fordings of roads which were submerged, and water was up to the side over the wheels of the vehicle. Um, but we had flowers just everywhere. It was quite spectacular, which normally you wouldn't get so much in this particular area. And you can see where the forest fires have also gone through. For the terns, it was great. Plenty of place, plenty of place to feed and plenty of place to nest. I never really thought that Australia would be such a wet place. Had no idea. Just never always thought about it as desert-like, but it's not. Even the Mimbi Nature Reserve, which is it was damp. The ground was kind of damp. We are in RV 4x4. This is one of my favorite shots from the whole trip. It's not even a bird. It just, for me, it epitomizes um, Australia. And here, wedge-tailed eagles with a kangaroo, which they've probably killed. I'm not too sure this would be roadkill because where we were, there weren't any vehicles. So I just love the name of this bird. It seemed to be a funny name. These babblers, I'm not sure. There was a dozen or so grey crown babblers which were playing in beside the curb of the road, and they would tumble and roll upon each other, and as if it was a game, as if it was. I couldn't see any reason. There wasn't no dust there for them to dust in, and they would just flop and fly around and then all gather together and roll over each other. It was quite something else. It was I haven't seen that behavior in any other species where a communal wrestling match was taking place. If there's some reason oh, there you go. We did come across one emu. The ostrich, of course, is not native to Australia, and the galah everywhere. One of the most common birds you see when you're traveling around. Now, those of you who've been to Australia many a time will probably might notice that I may have something wrong with one of the species. So at the end, if you be kind enough to put me in my place and let me know um, what is going on with maybe I have the odd species, which is hopefully none, but it might be the odd species which is not correctly labeled. I'd much appreciate it. For those who are interested, I just used a Nikon D500 camera and a 500 millimeter lens and my iPhone. So I just had the two iPhone and my one lens and one camera, and it worked out fine. So in one sense, the fact that it was wet and rainy some days was good because the flowers were out and there was plenty of insects emerging, butterflies were emerging, and all well was with the world. So, everybody knows that when you go to a new country and bird for the first time, such a wonderful feeling and experience. It's like the beginning of every new year for a lister. It's um, it's the best feeling, and this is what Australia was. And without too much planning, I made some plans. I'd looked at a map at Australia before we left and decided I wanted to see the pine, wanted to go certain places. One thing I did, I completely got the distances wrong. I looked at the map and I thought, well, I would do that in 2 weeks. We'll go from Cairns to Brisbane in 2 weeks and from Brisbane to Sydney in 10 days. Well, that's a lot of driving. So, and if I was to do the whole thing again, I would rent a vehicle at each place and fly from one center to another center and spend 2 weeks in each place or whatever, rather than try to drive from one area from Cairns to Brisbane, for example. It's just too much driving. So we weren't staying more than 2 nights anywhere, where some places we could have perhaps stayed a little bit longer. So many of you have been to Cairns, and on the Cairns there's the Esplanade, and as it says here, 50 species of birds. I was lucky enough to get great knots, Bartel Godwits. I did pick up some extra good birds. to Eastern Dowager, and which so when I arrived in Cairns, and those of you who've been there know that this is the Esplanade, and when the tide goes out, there are birds everywhere. But the tide was up for me, of course, and I had to do with whatever birds are in along the foreshore, which were these honey eaters and doves. I had some other birds which I can't show all. So next morning, I go down to the Esplanade from the campground, and this is what I was looking for, and this is what I found: Bartel Godwits and Jabiru, black-necked stork, they call it. They're Jabiru too. Uh, the bird on the left is the tattler. I believe we had one of those at the BCFO a couple of years ago. The Far Eastern curlew is a little bit bigger than the curlew we get on the Pacific coast. And the Asian dowitcher, which was a lot of birders were coming up to see that. That's a bird you don't see that often up there. Uh, and the botanical gardens. So what I did was that I planned to visit every center I went to, Brisbane, Cairns, Sydney, visit the botanical gardens and just see what I could pick up on my own at the botanical gardens. Bearing in mind, I had my wife with me, who's not a birder. So I had to incorporate some interest in the, include some of the interests of my wife, and it worked out pretty well. So we left Cairns and drove up into the Atherton tablelands. And as soon as you get out of the muggy, warm heat of Cairns, you're suddenly up into this beautiful temperate tablelands. And the temperature drops nicely. It's a beautiful temperature up there. Excellent birding. You could easily spend a week or 2 weeks up there. I think we spent 3 days. Um, we stayed at a campground called the Billabong. Now, the Billabong was interesting because there was a lot of Billabong there, but there was also a lot of bong going on. And it was an interesting place, an interesting campsite. There were some interesting characters there, but there were really interesting birds too. And there's some of the honey eaters, which were just around the campsite. And I was up every morning at 5 a.m. and it was absolutely brilliant, the bird song, and it was quite a magical place. Huge campsite, many, many acres, maybe 10, 20 acres of campgrounds, um, wild campground with a communal kitchen. Um, I couldn't get close enough to these cranes, but um, that's as much as I could zoom in on them. Red-tailed black cockatoos, the fields were covered in them. There were hundreds. I thought they were crows from a distance until I got closer and saw 200, 300, 500 of these birds uh, on the farmers' fields. Those of us who have driven in England wouldn't have an issue, but I did find myself pulling out of driveways and doing some really strange driving when I was there. The next trip was to go and see the cassowary. We went down to Innisfail, which is south of Cairns, and to look for the cassowary, the southern cassowary. It's the largest bird in the world. Stands almost as tall as a human. And we picked up a different camper van. This was actually really the best one we had with the microwave and uh, standard and much better traction. We drove through many, many colonial type towns with ironwork, a lot of shaded walkways to keep people cool during the shopping, and looking to look out for the koalas. We never actually saw a koala in the wild, but we did visit a museum which unfortunately and sadly explains how 8 million koalas were killed for their fur between the 1800s and 1920s, putting them at the brink of extinction. So there I took a picture of a captive one. Um, they also have suffered from serious bouts of chlamydia, which is also really serious for them. So the killing went on, and finally they were protected. And since we've had those, or since they've had fires in Australia recently, they've taken another big hit. So koalas are not in a good space and a good place at the moment. So they need all the help they can. So while I was there, they had some exhibitions of other creatures, which I didn't want to get too close to. Up on the further down the Innisfail, we came across the Curtin Big National Park, and you can hear a whipbird in the back. That's the male whipping. You also can hear the female goes cuckoo in the background. The orchard swallowtail feeds on fallen fruit. Um, you see a lot of these around orchards. Quite a common bird found on the along the grasslands. You get 10 or 15 of these birds in one flock. And as we made our way down coast towards Brisbane, we came across again, I think this is near Townsville, where we again stopped at the botanical gardens and picked up a whole bunch of birds. The dollar bird, so named because when it flies, it has white spots on the wings, looks like silver dollars, and that's where it gets its name from. Many species of kingfisher, many of them eat lizard. This particular one's got a looks like a frog or a small frog. Um, a typical lake pond area on the coast. Uh, Often you'll see kangaroos feeding around the edges. A lot of many duck species and snakes. Again, you just have to be careful not to walk in the long grass. And the iconic black swan seen on many stamps. And I think one of the oldest stamps in Australia has the swan on. Sometimes we saw as many 200 swans, saw them in brackish water, seen them on the ocean, and seen them in freshwater. So they're pretty adaptable. This is a large thrush, probably a third bigger than the robin. It's quite a large thrush. Just a kind of nice. And these lorikeets were feeding on termites from within that branch. And this is also um, a higher level, maybe a couple of 100 meters high level up on the on a mountain just south of Cairns. These I was having lunch and I spilled some blueberries, and within seconds, these honey eaters had come down to my feet, and that's an adult and a young had come down and ate the berries which I'd spilled on the ground. So we were looking for the cassowary. Who wants to go to Australia and not see a cassowary? It couldn't happen, could it? It couldn't happen. So we slowed down and made sure, and I took pictures of every signage I could find. I do that everywhere I go when I travel around the world to remind me where I've been. It also gives me information I might need for a presentation like this. And uh, uh, we still hadn't seen any cassowaries, and we'd spent 2 days looking for them. And we came across this moana, about 6 feet long, pretty big. This sunbird appeared just half of it's in the sun, half it's in the shade. And everywhere you go, there's warnings about cassowaries, and you not want to get near a cassowary if they have young. The male cassowary, the once the female has incubated the eggs, she's booted out, and the male nurses the young and teaches them how to find fruit. And they use this horn to sift through the ground. This is on the beach, which eventually find our um, we did eventually find our cassowary. Now, we were traveling down the coast, and I just happened to remember I'd contacted some birding pals, and I gave them a phone, and they invited us to stay at their house, and they bought 10 acres of property and let it go wild. And that whole property was full of birds which would have been in the area, and plants and bugs. And there was a large python at the bottom of the stairs, which we had to negotiate every time we went for breakfast or use the loo, which my wife was not particularly wild about, but whatever, that's part of birding, right? So the tail-headed Rosella was the bird we saw at their garden. Would had not seen this bird had it not been for the kindness of these guys who put us up. And a Jerusalem or Jerrygon, is not how you pronounce it, but Jerusalem. This is the first time the bird had ever been seen in our garden, so it was kind of nice. In the evening, they took us down to the beach to see the flying foxes, which is really cool. And there are three species there. We saw the gray-headed flying fox. We didn't really have enough time. And as I say, if I was to do the whole thing again, I would make sure I have 2, 3, 4 days in each place. Uh, Having only 1 or 2 days somewhere often cuts short our opportunities to see nocturnal birds or. So I've never seen I've never seen anything like this in my whole life. It was quite amazing. And as we made our way down uh, the coast, the scenery was stunning. We went through sugarcane plantations. We stayed overnight at a sugar plantation outpost, just as I'd seen on TV shows as a kid in England. It was absolutely amazing. At this particular place we stayed at, we picked up some more birds, and also a wallaby, which we hadn't seen. And there had been a forest fire through this area the year before. Honestly, I couldn't see where the forest fire had been. It had grown back so much that it was hard to tell if there had been a forest fire or not. But at the farm, and we had a number of good birds which we hadn't seen before. So the species numbers was beginning to mount up, getting up into the 200 species of birds, and we were only halfway through the trip. It's kind of really nice. Now, not every campsite in Australia is free camping. You don't have to pay for a campsite. Some of them are like this, are just basically a parking lot with washrooms and some tenting areas. And this one was particularly good because it was right next to a national park. So I could park and walk for hours in the park. Many of the campsites were run by the Lions Club or the city council. They're called dollar campsites, where you put a dollar into the in a box and you stay overnight in its facilities. And they're always usually on the outskirts of town, which means they're in wild parts of the town or wild parts of nature. They're not controlled campsites in the sense they're manicured. So you do get a lot more birds in the free campsites. This particular campsite here was the most busy one we ever went to. Mostly we had our own place, and they were quiet and safe and clean and free. And there's an app you can download so you can do a tour, as many of you have already done, for a way, way less expensive than if you were going to go perhaps across Canada, which can cost a lot. So now we got into the area where they did a lot of the fruit growing and uh, sugar cane, and of course you're going to get a lot of raptors there um, due to the amount of critters which would feed on that type of plantation. And now the green cap bird is one of the bowerbirds. It builds a kind of a nest. There are numerous bowerbirds which we came across. I'm not too sure how the soundtrack for the Kookaburra got out of whack, but it did. This is another botanical garden, wild birds, but something like Rifle Bird Sanctuary, somewhere where you can go and see birds naturally. You know, the lighting wasn't always the best, but I've come to the conclusion that you get to see what you see and you don't get upset. I'm not going to be worried about not seeing a specific bird or this one is taken from about a mile away. That's okay with me. As we approached Brisbane from the north, we came into the Glass Mountains, which are spectacular. Climbing, uh, historically, the Aboriginal people have this is a sacred place, and well, with visiting, it's only I think like an hour outside of Brisbane, and you can spend a couple of days just wandering around there. Of course, I took this from one of these peaks across the valley, and particularly good place for lizards, butterflies, and a few birds. A few, I think I had a few new species. And I was to stay in Brisbane with some friends who invited us to stay for a few days. And I thought, great, this is Albatross and Birdie Place. I didn't realize it was a golf club and it's something to do with golf. The fairy wrens are interesting. They're a communal bird. They once the a brood is fledged, other members of the group, and they're often five or six or 10 birds in a group, will help feed young. The female is quite promiscuous and doesn't stick with any particular male, and she can have offspring. Well, as I was mentioned to somebody, they humans do that too, right? So, I can hear somebody speaking at the microphone. So this is outside Alberton. This garden or so our next stop was the center. We were going to go to the Blue Bears Rock in the center of the attitude. I think the soundtrack's a little bit out of whack. So if you're going to there you go. Is that better? You go to sit on the left-hand side of the plane because when you fly in, you'll see this from the window. Uh, as you can see, 1873 was when the first white people saw the rock, and it is something to behold. And those who've been there will attest the fact that it is something spectacular, even in the middle of the day when you first see it, and there's no light on it. It is quite spectacular, and most of it apparently, two-thirds of this rock is underground. So when you get there, you need a park permit to go in. I bought a 3-day permit. It doesn't look much in the middle of the day, but toward evening is the time to go. Uh, there were lots of people there having champagne and whatever, crackers, whatever they do, champagne. And uh, the first night, the sunset was not particularly spectacular. It was, so if that was only the only day you could be there, I would say it would be underwhelming. So we were there for 3, 4 days. So we had a chance to see different light. So we walked around the base of the rock. I think it's about 10 kilometers. Took us 6 hours, mainly because we were birding and just jaw gobsmacked by the whole beauty of the whole thing. And we picked up a few birds. The wolves would swallow a nest in the cavities in the rock itself. And this kestrel, you can see, um, that's its nesting spot there. And the pictographs are from the Wallaby Marla Hare or Hare Wallaby people. What they mean, who knows? I'm not too sure. We didn't really have a guide. It would take some explanation. It's somewhere I wouldn't mind revisiting in another life, but I'm not too sure wherever I'll ever get anywhere near this place again. This was a local artist beside the road. And now I wish I'd bought the thing off her, but um, yeah. So around the base of the rock are um, desert oak, which and other plants, which this white-plumed honeyeater is feasting on. I don't know exactly how many species of birds. I must have had maybe a dozen species, a new species, maybe 10 or dozen species. This is actually at the rock itself. There's a water hole, and water runs off there, even the dew. And there's some of the birds we saw. And nearby are the ogres. And I'm afraid I cannot pronounce that name. Kata, not sure how to pronounce it, but we would get up every morning, 4, 4:15, get out to the rock at 5 a.m. every morning to see sunrises and then spend the early hours before it got too warm walking around and around this particular day was the Olgas. And that's photographed from Uluru, the rock itself. I don't know, it's about 10 or 15 kilometers maybe away. And here is the landscape of this is probably 6 o'clock in the morning before the sun is just over the horizon. You see the desert oak, spinifex, and these trees have deep, deep roots, of course. And the morning sweet light is obviously the best time, and it's worth getting up. In fact, if you're going to go there, that's the time to be there early in the morning. The evenings were not so spectacular, I thought, but that's um, that's my preference to be early in the morning. And I walked through the wind valleys, Valley of the Winds, spent maybe 6 hours through in the Olgas. I started early in the morning. I just got back to the bus with about 15 minutes to spare, and I was moving and stopping, photographing birds, and um, one of the more common birds in the Olgas was the shrike thrush. In fact, the shrike thrush was everywhere we went, desert, seashore, forest. So one of the more common birds. On the third and final evening, we had black clouds and rain and lightning and on the way out to the rock. And the bus driver says, "This is going to be the night." And after the rainbow, uh, the rock lit up. And that's the iconic sight which we all wanted to see, which those people who were drinking champagne may have not seen if it was just we were I knew we had to book more than one night, so we splurged and saved. But there is a campsite there for those on a budget. You can drive there, or you can stay in the communal motel lodge, or you can splurge and stay at the hotel. So now we're down from driving from Brisbane, and we went to O'Reilly's, which is a very famous lodge. It's $500 a night or $400 a night US Australian. And there's also a campsite there, which we used, and the campsite um, was, I think, $50 a night. And it's just inland. You see where it says Gold Coast, just to the left. Um, you see O'Reilly's Rainforest Retreat. It's about a 2 hour drive from Brisbane, and it's a winding road up to a escarpment with waterfalls and first growth forest. And you can glamp it. I'm not too sure what the glamping cost is. We stayed in the foreground here at the pads with our camper van. We almost got blown away one night, but we survived. And this was another vehicle, the third vehicle, um, and it worked fine. And this is the lodge you see on the top left. You see the white building on the top left. That's the lodge and the campsite, and then this beautiful valley. And they have a good amount of king parrots there. They had years and years and years ago, a king parrot was brought back to health after being attacked by a raptor, and it brought back a female. And now those two birds bring back flocks of parrots every day, every morning. They feed them. Otherwise, you go on the trails, and I couldn't find a guide, unfortunately, so I didn't get to see birds like the lyrebird or perhaps other birds I may have missed. So I was completely on my own. But this is what I found, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to get what I get, and I don't get upset. That's something my wife taught me because there's no point getting upset when you're bird watching. So life's much better when you're not stressed out about things. So just an amazing forest, amazing birds. Um, again, I could have spent another 2 days there, perhaps. I think we were there 2 nights. The first bird we saw was the satin bowerbird. There was a nest, a bower, which they'd created, and it was full of blue plastic pieces of plastic bottle caps. And the last day we went, then drove down towards Sydney and on the trip home. And we stopped off at Coffs Harbour because there's a bird colony there. And although we didn't see any of the shearwaters because they come in at night, we did get to see um, other birds there. Um, when they built the marina out to the island, they all, of course, introduced rats to the island, and they've now had to spend a whole bunch of money and time getting rid of the rats. But that's humans for you, isn't it? That's what happens when humans interfere with nature. But on the foreshore of the island, did pick up a few extra birds from my list. And as I mentioned earlier, I think I landed up with 245, 46 species of birds for my trip, which I was very happy with. All common birds. If I was to go again with a tour, maybe they would zone in on more endemics and more rarer species, and I could really boost my list up. But we'll have to see. I think, and I'm not 100% sure that these are the Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin. Very difficult to tell, although one has a white mark on the tail, but I don't know if that means anything. And there's one for Gary, and that's BirdLife Australia counted those, and they made some stamps, which Gary probably has. And there's myself, and there's my dear wife, and I thank you very much for um, listening to it, and hopefully I've had no response back. So